So you want to threaten me that you won't give me a visa to America or give me a visa to London? I don't care. I'll go to Africa and enjoy the company of my own people.
When we were facing apartheid, when we were facing oppression, he was not here. He did not fight side by side with us. And we were able, on our own, yes, with support of progressive forces in the world, to resolve the apartheid question. As far as I recall, Donald Trump was not around the negotiating table when we negotiated the end of apartheid. So stick around there in the White House. We will do our business here, and we will find solutions for our problem. So stay out of our issues, and we will not get involved in your issues in America. You have your own problems. Leave us alone.
But are we going to retreat because America doesn't want us to do that? Never. Even if America decides that I should no longer enter America, it's okay, I will enter Zimbabwe. I'll enter Botswana, I'll enter Nigeria, I'll enter Africa, my home. Why should I be concerned about people who are going to feed me beggars and make me fat when I can go to Nigeria and eat jollof? It's not easy to fight America. It has never been easy. But like Fidel Castro, we're not going to retreat.
A quiet shift is happening beneath the noise of global diplomacy, and it's far more powerful than any public statement or press conference. For years, pressure has been applied behind closed doors, expectations quietly enforced, and influence assumed to be permanent. But suddenly, that pressure has lost its grip. What was once taken for granted is now being openly challenged, and the shock is rippling through global power centers. The moment feels different. This isn't a routine disagreement or a temporary diplomatic standoff. This is a clear signal that the old methods no longer work the way they used to. A nation at the heart of Africa's most industrialized economy has made a decision that cuts straight through decades of geopolitical habit, and the message is unmistakable. Alignment is no longer automatic, loyalty is no longer assumed, and influence must now be earned, not demanded. For a long time, global power followed familiar patterns. Economic leverage translated into political obedience. Access to markets came with expectations. Partnerships were rarely equal, and pressure was often disguised as cooperation. But those patterns are breaking down, and this moment exposes just how fast the world is changing. What once happened quietly is now happening in the open, and it's impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes, intense efforts were made to steer the outcome. Warnings were delivered, consequences were hinted at. Strategic language was used to remind everyone who still held the upper hand, but the response that came back wasn't hesitation, it was resolve. A decision rooted in long-term calculation, not short-term fear. A choice that reflects a deeper understanding of where global power is heading, not where it used to be. This isn't just about choosing one bloc over another. It's about redefining what partnership means in a world that is no longer dominated by a single center of gravity. The rise of alternative alliances has created new options, and with options comes confidence. Confidence to say no, confidence to resist pressure, confidence to prioritize national interest over external approval. The reaction has been swift and telling. Political analysts scramble to explain what went wrong. Commentators debate whether influence has been overstated for years. Markets watch closely, aware that political alignment shapes trade flows, investment decisions, and long-term economic strategy. The uncertainty isn't about one country's choice, it's about what that choice represents. This decision exposes a growing reality that many preferred to ignore. The Global South is no longer waiting for permission. Emerging economies are no longer content with being junior partners in systems that limit their growth while demanding their loyalty. They are building parallel structures, alternative financial systems, and new diplomatic networks that reduce dependence on any single power. And Africa sits right at the center of this shift. For decades, the continent was treated as a battleground for influence rather than a player with its own strategy. Choices were framed as obligations. Alignment was framed as inevitability. But that era is fading fast. Today's decisions are shaped by infrastructure, trade diversification, energy security, and industrial growth, not by fear of disapproval from distant capitals. What makes this moment especially powerful is that it didn't come with chaos or confrontation. There were no dramatic walkouts, no explosive speeches, no threats shouted across microphones, just a firm decision, calmly delivered, with full awareness of its consequences. That calm is what makes it so unsettling. It signals confidence, it signals preparation, it signals that the choice was made long before the pressure arrived. Global power doesn't shift overnight, but it does shift decisively. It shifts when pressure fails. It shifts when assumptions collapse. It shifts when countries realize they have leverage they were told they didn't have. This moment marks one of those shifts. The implications stretch far beyond one relationship. Other nations are watching closely, some with curiosity, others with quiet admiration, many with calculation. Because if pressure can fail here, it can fail elsewhere. And if alternatives can work here, they can work anywhere. This is how momentum builds, not through loud declarations, but through visible examples. One choice emboldens another. One act of independence reshapes expectations. And suddenly, what once seemed unthinkable becomes possible. The global order has always relied on perception as much as power. The perception of inevitability, the perception of dominance, the perception that resistance comes at too high a cost. But when that perception cracks, the entire structure becomes unstable. This moment is one of those cracks, small on the surface, massive beneath. The conversation is no longer about who applies pressure, but about who can offer real value, who can invest without control, who can partner without conditions that undermine sovereignty, who can respect strategic autonomy while still delivering economic growth. Those questions are reshaping alliances in real time. And as this shift accelerates, the world is being forced to confront a new reality. Influence is no longer guaranteed by history. Power is no longer enforced by habit, and Africa is no longer a passive arena in someone else's rivalry. This is not defiance for its own sake. It is calculation. It is strategy. It is a recognition that the future will be multipolar, competitive, and defined by choice rather than coercion. The decision sends a message not just to one capital, but to the entire world. The balance is changing. Pressure failed because the world it depended on no longer exists. What replaces it will define the next era of global politics. And the first signs are already here: quiet, confident, and impossible to reverse. The real consequences begin to unfold after the decision settles in, when reactions replace speculation and strategy replaces shock. What initially looked like a diplomatic setback now reveals itself as something deeper, a loss of leverage that exposes how much the global balance has already shifted, the silence that follows the failed pressure speaks louder than any statement. It confirms that the old tools no longer guarantee the old outcomes. Behind closed doors, urgent reassessments take place. Assumptions that guided foreign policy for decades are suddenly unreliable. Influence that once flowed naturally now meets resistance. Advisors search for explanations, but the answers are uncomfortable. The world has changed faster than the strategies designed to control it, and the gap between expectation and reality is widening. Economic calculations immediately come under scrutiny. Trade routes, investment pipelines, and future agreements are all reevaluated through a new lens. If pressure cannot secure alignment, then incentives must change. But incentives require competition, and competition means alternatives now exist. That realization shifts the tone from confidence to concern. Markets pick up on the tension. Currency movements reflect uncertainty. Long-term investors hesitate, not because of instability, but because predictability has vanished. The rules are no longer clear. Political alignment can no longer be assumed, and that uncertainty carries real economic weight. When influence weakens, risk increases. What makes this moment especially significant is that it does not stand alone. It fits into a broader pattern that has been quietly forming for years. Infrastructure partnerships that bypass traditional systems, trade agreements that reduce dependency, financial mechanisms designed to operate outside established control. These developments were once dismissed as symbolic or limited. Now they look strategic. Across the African continent, this decision resonates strongly. It validates a growing belief that strategic autonomy is achievable, that diversification is not only possible but necessary, that no single external power should dominate economic destiny. For many, this moment represents proof, not theory, that alternatives can work. The diplomatic fallout remains measured, but the message is unmistakable. Pressure without leverage is just noise, and leverage now depends on mutual benefit, not historical dominance. Relationships built on imbalance are being replaced by negotiations built on choice. This shift forces a difficult recalibration. Influence must now be earned through tangible value: technology, infrastructure, access, and respect for sovereignty. The era of assumption is ending. The era of negotiation is beginning. Global rivals take notice. Some see opportunity, others see risk, but all recognize the signal. The failure of pressure in one case weakens its credibility everywhere. It introduces doubt into a system that relied heavily on certainty, and doubt, once introduced, spreads quickly. Strategic planners now face a dilemma: escalation risks, accelerating the very shift they want to prevent. Retaliation could push more countries toward alternative alliances. Silence could be interpreted as weakness. Every option carries cost, and none guarantee control. Meanwhile, alternative blocs quietly consolidate. They don't need to announce victory. Momentum does the work for them. Each new partnership reinforces the perception that global power is dispersing. That perception fuels further realignment, and realignment reshapes the map. This is how transitions happen, not through collapse, but through accumulation. Small decisions layering into irreversible change. One choice alters expectations, another confirms the trend. Soon, the old center can no longer pull everything back into orbit. The psychological impact may be the most significant consequence of all. When pressure fails publicly, confidence erodes privately. Confidence in dominance, confidence in inevitability, confidence in control. And once confidence cracks, influence weakens everywhere at once. This moment also reframes the role of Africa in global politics. No longer a passive field of competition, but an active participant with agency, leverage, and strategic vision. Decisions are no longer reactive, they are proactive, calculated, and future-focused. What unfolds next is not confrontation, but recalibration, a world learning to operate without a single axis of power, a system adjusting to multiplicity. A global order becoming more complex, less predictable, and far more contested. The failed pressure marks a turning point not because of what was said, but because of what no longer worked. It reveals that the mechanisms of control have limits, and those limits are being tested more frequently. As alliances shift and strategies adapt, one reality becomes impossible to deny. The world has entered a new phase, one where choice matters more than fear, where leverage comes from options, not obligations, and where influence flows toward those who can offer partnership without dominance. This is not the end of global power struggles. It is their evolution. And those who fail to adapt may soon discover that pressure, once their greatest weapon, has become their greatest weakness. The world has now crossed a line it can't step back from. What began as a single decision has grown into a clear signal that the era of automatic influence is fading. Pressure has been tested, and it failed, not with noise or confrontation, but with calm resolve, and that calm is what makes this moment historic. This shift is bigger than alliances or rival blocs. It's about control, choice, and the future of global power. Nations are no longer lining up behind one dominant voice. They are weighing options, calculating long-term interests, and choosing paths that serve their own growth. The balance that once felt fixed is now fluid, and every new decision accelerates the change. Africa stands at the center of this transformation, no longer reacting to global forces but shaping them. The continent's role is evolving from influence target to influence maker. And as more countries recognize the leverage they hold, the ripple effects will only grow stronger. What comes next won't be decided by pressure or threats, but by value, respect, and mutual benefit. The world is entering a phase where dominance is negotiated, not imposed, and where power belongs to those who understand the future, not those clinging to the past. This wasn't just a diplomatic setback, it was a warning. The old playbook is losing its power, and the world is already turning the page.